Yeah, so I guess just for the recording, the question is, what's
Mm,
the sort of algorithmic proof of that we
mm,
have in Pietra? Um, so we're not layer one, actually. We're way more like layer four. So what Pietra is more of an operating system that's built on top of Hashgraph. So we're using
mm,
the Hashgraph system, which is a
mm,
distributed proof of stake system that's efficient. It's
mhm,
their own, they call it the chatter protocol.
mhm,
And our idea is, so we first came out of a VR company that was
mm,
building a VR it's like a 3D based operating system. It's pretty wild stuff. Um, but when so I was starting a few VR companies in like 2014, 2015, and an old partner of mine reached out to me, was like, "Hey, look, I have this company. I'm kind of stepping back. Do you want to step in?" I was like, "Okay, let me see what you guys are doing." Uh, and this was right after I had written about local currencies and how you can use DLT to
mm,
basically make a local currency that was based on rent and real economics. So it had a real
mm,
economic flow with like price earnings ratios, and um, you could see basically a city's local management and how they collect rents versus how they distribute the profits to those rents. So the idea was basically in cities are harsh. Everyone's trying to profit off of you. And I was
mm,
living in an art community that got shut down, and so I was trying to relocate the art community. And I would go to these art places in Los Angeles that were run by artists from big institutions, and I would ask them like, "So what's your structure? Like, are you guys a non-for-profit?" And they would literally
mm,
laugh at me. They would like they
mm,
it was like such an absurd notion that they would laugh. So like the idea of non-for-profit rents just doesn't exist in America.
mm,
And so I was thinking, okay, you could make this like structure where you make it's. I mean, I could go into the economics of La Reina, but I was basically working on this very local level DLT project
mm,
just before my old partner reached out to me about the VR project.
mhm,
So I was already sort of like thinking in that direction.
mhm,
But then I saw the technology that they had, and it was based on WebVR and WebGL, and they were making an operating system that could work on that. And I
mm,
was like, whoa, that's really cool. And like, it's already in VR. Like, you can go in VR in a
right.
WebGL portal, and it's just like, it's immediate, it's fast.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like, that's really cool. But as a game developer, there's too much value in things like Unity and Unreal to just like start from scratch on this like raw thing. And so the value add for me was like, okay, going to be really hard to compete with Unreal and Unity at that level to make like
Mm,
an engine. But how can we use this in another fashion? So like, so from there we shifted from the VR stuff to making and seeing if we could take the so the back end of a lot of WebGL and WebVR stuff kind of just works with a lot of distributed computing already. And so
right.
it took a while to get it to work off of Docker and to actually get it to work on Hashgraph. But the
Mhm,
system, our system is called the Abstract Virtual Machine. It was very similar to Ethereum's. I think Ethereum has like a EVM or something like that. It's like the Ethereum virtual machine.
yeah.
And so we were able to pretty quickly start migrating over the WebGL and WebVR tech to still use that, but use it on a distributed format. So that's kind of like where our background comes in. Now, where it comes into the DLT stuff is, and this is I think a really good thing, is because we're kind of agnostic to the system. Like our value
Mhm,
add isn't in it's it's really not a crypto Austrian play. So most cryptocurrencies are really like modeled after getting physical gold. It's just like,
mm,
okay, here's a bunch of digital codes. Like this is difficult math. And so
mhm,
because you're doing this mathematical symbolic work, we'll give you rewards for maintaining the ledger. So our play is very different than that. It's really more like, okay, we're going to make a usable software system, and then we'll invite creators to upload data to it, and then have services between the data. So really the value play is in data sovereignty. So it doesn't, the value is very theoretical at this point because it's predicated on the fact that you have to have users and you have to have the data. But the idea is technically, even though we're based on Hashgraph, we could shift that and swap it out for another protocol if there was a more efficient, faster protocol. And so our value add is a layer stack higher. So what we, and this is what we're working on now, is our sort of proof of algorithm that values the money. Not so. Okay, let me make one more caveat. There's a lot going on. There's sort of three layers that we operate on. There's the local layer, the national layer, and the global layer. And so we have solutions for the local and the global, and we just kind of leave the national as is. And so I was working on the local layer, and then because I was working on that for the what I call the La Reina project, we went into this, the Pietra project was working on the global layer with the data sovereignty. And so our proof of algorithm is really proof of expert work. So we're saying you could dig holes in the middle of the desert. That's a lot of work, but it doesn't really do anything. And so our whole idea is we need to make functional, usable services, very similar to HoloChain. They're probably the most similar to us, as by far. Or also sort of library is pretty similar. So basically, the system itself is valuable because it creates functions. And the way that we value that is through public and private access. And so there's like a public-private split. And basically, public-based things create value, and private-based things are a cost. So if you want to use it privately, so let's say you're a big corporation and hackers, or there's a fire in one of your server locations. And so all of a sudden, your data bandwidth goes down and you need a quick cloud hosting service. So you could go to Amazon, you could go to, IBM has a service now. And I mean, there's tons of them now. You could go to one of those and just buy it normally through the normal market, or you could go through Pietra and buy it through our market. And depending on the market rates, it might make more sense to go with Google. It might make sense to go with us. And that's just for like basic data hosting. But the idea and the really important thing is, especially moving into the future when you're doing really large scale AI data plays where you're like scanning. I mean, this is already happening. So it's kind of like, it's, do you want to, so if you have so let's just, if you could just imagine there was thousands of users on it that had pictures, they had whatever their data was.
Data,
And all those users could select what data that was available to sell. So let's just say you had a bunch of pictures and you're like, okay, I want to be able to sell this. This is access, so for people to use for AI training, basically. And so whenever that data would get called, you would get paid because it would be used, but there would be a cost associated to using that algorithm. And the idea is because we have robust data sets, our algorithms would be better because we're paying our creators more. So like right now, Instagram can do this. Like a lot of companies are doing this already, but they're doing it in a nefarious way. They're kind of hiding the fact that they're doing it. And so we're saying, okay, if we have a system that actually pays creators and people their data more, people will be more likely to use that system. And we could just sort of leverage that data against large companies for private use, rather than large companies using our own data against us, And so that's kind of the big circle there. But on top of that, we've also identified just a lot of different use cases that's not just in web hosting. It's just like there's tons of use cases where there's work already being done that's not being rewarded by the market sufficiently. And so last year, we actually spent a lot of time in the healthcare sector. And this gets like pretty deep into American medical economics, which is absurd. Um,
Yeah.
but basically, in America, we have. Sorry, I was getting a weird echo. In America, we bill $3.2 trillion for so all of our in U.S. hospitals and doctors build $3.2 trillion and only receive like 890 billion of that 3.2 trillion. It's
Right.
really weird. So it's just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, it's basically running a business where only 25% of your people pay you. So the value that they're making is huge. Now, is it worth that 3.2 that they're billing? No, probably not that much, but it's definitely more than the 800 billion that they're receiving. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you like walked into a Best Buy or if you walked into a Costco and you got a TV, you didn't pay for it, you still get the value of the TV. That value is still real, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
making these real medical services and these like real doctor's visits that aren't being paid. And because of that, the market isn't like, if you look at the amount of doctors in America, it's like half the rate of England and Germany and all these other countries. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, if there's already scenarios where people are doing real expert work, right? We could give them money, just be like, okay, we'll buy your debt from you. You know, okay, this
Mm-hmm.
patient isn't giving you the money, we'll buy it from you, and then in exchange for purchasing that bill, that debt, you can then use that currency to pay other bills, and then at a discount rate. So basically, we're saying, okay, if we give doctors and hospitals this monopoly money, fake money, right? And we say, we'll give you, based on the US dollar, on a 1-to-1 ratio, we'll give you, for every debt dollar that you have, we'll give you what we call our currency stone. Uh, and then you use that as a cash discount, right? So now patients are like, okay, when you come to our hospital, and we call our network assurance rather than insurance. But if you come to our hospital, if you want like a 25% cash discount, you have to go through this currency platform. And it could be all on demand, like all very quick swipes of what is it, EMV cards now with the EMV card chip readers.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that would then do, it's like, okay, I'm a patient, I have my bill. Do I want to pay $1,000 in cash, or do I want to pay like 750 in stone in US dollars in value? And so it's like a no-brainer. Of course, I want to pay less. But in order to do that, I have to purchase the stone from people who have stone already. And who has the stone? The doctors and hospitals. So it's like, how do you then value the money? It's like, okay, there's a circular flow of, if we can create new functions through just economics. And so that's kind of how it works. It's like, how do you make a system of value that's predicated on real services? And so what
Yeah.
we're doing right now is going around and trying to establish those real services. So we don't want to launch with hypotheticals. We want to launch with actual real economic backing. And so it's just like, oh, okay, you can see the full circle of how this works. It's, it's not like you're just printing it on demand. It's like there's a real value backing on it, and it's based off of real work, not just like running digital codes. So it's really looking at crypto from a Keynesian perspective rather than like an Austrian perspective. Which in my opinion, there's a reason why countries don't really run gold-backed currencies right now. It's like, it's a very old idea. There's a lot more value in running Keynesian economic principles rather than Austrian. So that's where our value add is. So we call it proof of valuable work or proof of expert work. And not only would that work for healthcare, it's really there's a huge skew in motivation for only making human behaviors that are profitable. And so if your work isn't profitable, it comes at a cost. And so that under incentivizes things like healthcare and journalism, education, art, obviously, like pretty much any production, any artistic production. So there's a lot of sectors that need more incentive because it's like the market doesn't care about effort. It's like, can you make money, right? Doesn't matter how much effort it takes to make money in that sector. So it's like, not everything is priced equally, right? And so what we're trying to fix is like, okay, how do we justify these behaviors that people have that take a lot of effort that aren't being rewarded by the market. And so we're saying we could do that as like a new type of market that spins in the opposite direction. Like if the for-profit market spins this way, we're trying to be like spinning this way. And I would definitely say the for-profit, the national for-profit protocol takes money from nature and brings it into culture. It's very extractionary. It's very like, it's simple. It's like, okay, hey, look, there's woods over there. We need people to go turn that woods into logs. Go grab an axe and start chopping down trees and then bring those trees to the market, right? And so it's like I say, it's like pigs to pork and wood to logs. It's all these, and we have words for these things, but we don't really have a way of adding value back into the forest. Like all strategies that add value back into the forest are a cost. And so this would be a way of like, oh, we can issue currency for this valuable work. And the reason why that currency would be valuable in general, obviously, because if you issue currency, it's like someone's doing something and you just give them money for it, that's going to be inflationary. So boom, all of a sudden you're printing more money, so the value of the currency is less, but you're getting behavior for it. And then you can leverage the value of that currency through the usable globalized system for basically for large corporations to do to purchase it back at. So the idea is like, okay, if you print a lot of money, you're gonna have a lot of inflation, but because you have a lot of inflation, your currency is gonna go down in price. But if you're a buyer, like if you need to buy that currency and it's now really cheap, now when you have your server fire, because you printed a bunch of that currency, oh, it's really cheap. I need quick server space. And because the currency is cheap, I can buy that way cheaper than going to Google or IBM. And so a large corporation purchases a bunch of the currency in order to purchase services on the platform. And so it's like, how do you make a generalized web platform that would be better for the earth rather than not? And so like we can make that. And really, I don't know if this is like completely obvious, but it seems like we're heading, like the first team that gets an AGI is really going to start ramping up their separation between other teams. Like
AGI?
So AGI is artificial general intelligence. You might hear it as a digital super intelligence. It's just this idea that once you get to a certain level of ability on a computer system, because you have that ability, you can start applying that ability to yourself, and you are going to start out competing. And so if you're in a competitive environment and you get this, the first team who gets it starts dominating really quickly. And it's really dangerous. And so it's just like, oh, wow, we're sort of at this, like, it's sort of like a nuclear arms race for AGI. And we're saying, because the meta structure that we have is the for-profit capitalistic system, all countries kind of use that. There's not really a safe way to make AGI right now, because if AGI is competitive, it will outcompete other humans, right? And that gets really dangerous really fast. So we're saying, okay, if we can create a system that is a platform for like responsible AGI, we can use that through democratic principles, not through company or country like principles, to basically help stabilize certain functions on the national level. So we're saying we can create this system and use that to leverage that against business, and get the full circle of the economic value there. I mean, it's very, very, very macro oriented, so it can get really confusing, and without graphs and like tracking it on paper, it's a lot to take in.
No, it's thank you for running through all that. There's definitely a lot of questions which come to mind for me, and a lot of great points. And you actually reminded me of, I guess, sort of the main thing that reached out to me about the project, which is its focus around data sovereignty, and really that being, I guess, a core pull for a lot of people for what we should want if we don't want it already,
it's essential.
Whether we realize or not, as you're saying, data is used nefariously all over the place, and if AGI comes to be in that sort of environment, it does get really dangerous. I think. And I think what's being proposed in a change in incentives, which would then change behaviors, is massive. And there's a lot of projects that are leaning that way. I was actually quite surprised to hear that you talk of the medical industry. I know it's a huge issue, particularly in America.
Yeah,
I didn't expect and I guess I don't see right now how Pietra, or how the healthcare industry would plug into Pietra, but that's okay. Yeah, I guess, man, where do I go into from here?
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I'm almost, now that we're recording, one thing that uh, would help me at least,
Mhm.
and I'm sorry for these sort of basic foundational questions, but Keynesian versus Austrian.
Yeah,
So Austrian, from what I understand, is essentially, um, is it hoarding scarce goods and building
exactly.
up value that exact way, and how would Keynesian compare to that?
Okay, yeah. So I think the big insight for Keynesian economics would be, uh, for me at least, is transaction velocity. And so
Hmm.
the whole goal for Keynesian economics is, if you that so with Austrian, you're sort of saying scarcity drives value. And it's very much
Mm-hmm.
looking at the unit itself. It's like, this is valuable because I have it and you don't, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Keynesian's
Mm-hmm.
not looking at it that way. It's saying, no, economies are good because it creates trade in between people. And the
Mm-hmm.
faster we trade, the more functions you have available to you personally. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very, very different mindset. It's
That's
saying,
awesome.
right. So
Yeah.
it's saying the economy is for people. The economy is a function of society. That's what Keynesian is
Yeah.
saying. And Austrian is saying, no, the economy is a natural thing and it's built on natural scarcity. And
Right.
I think that's where a lot of the attitude of extraction comes out of. And so uh, there's reasons why obviously scarcity is valuable, and there's things that are scarce and there's natural scarcity. But
Mm.
you also have to think about how technology improves access to things. And if you have if you have artificial scarcity just to drive up value, is that actually a net benefit? And I would say
Mm.
obviously not. It slows down
Mm.
transaction velocity. It I mean, for example, we could just look at a bridge, right? So this is a really easy example, I think. Is let's just say you have a town of like a tomato shop and a cucumber shop and a lettuce shop. And in order to make a salad, you had to go to all the shops and get it. And there was a river through the town. I'm just like spitballing off the top of my
Go.
head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and there's a river through the town, and every time you wanted to make a salad, you had to cross the river like 3 times. I don't know, something like that, and it was really hard. And so the
Mm-hmm.
town is like, okay, we love salad. Let's come together and make a bridge, so it's easier to make salad, so we can all have more salad, right? Great, the bridge is awesome. Um, an Austrian play on that would be to say, okay, well, after 10 years of having the bridge, uh, I'm looking for a business to do, and I'm realizing, oh, look, this bridge is a choke point. Everyone needs this bridge if they want to make salad, and there's a huge demand for salad. So what I can come and do is I can come and put a toll on this bridge, and it slows everyone down. But now everyone has to give me money, right? And so the individual who makes the toll on the bridge gets a lot of money, but the net value for the society goes down because there's less
Mm-hmm.
salad, right? So you're not
Yeah.
actually doing anything beneficial for the society. You're just
Mm.
taking elements of that society and putting it into your pocket. So you're sort of saying, how do I profit off the society rather than how
Yeah.
does society create value?
Mm.
And I think that's the big difference is we're we're looking to speed up transaction velocity. So like for example, another more modern example that's like much more feasible is every time you swipe your credit card networks are not free. They charge
Mm.
their merchants all the time, and so especially I think in the U.S. Visa and MasterCard is like 25 cents per transaction plus a percentage. So if you're running a small bodega, or if you're like CVS or Walgreens or like a pharmacy that's, doing a lot of like sub $10 sales, that quarter per transaction ends up being like millions upon millions of dollars just lost from your business. Uh, and so if you can create a system, oh man, I completely forgot about this. Uh, if you can create a public computing platform, and that's really what Pietra is, it's a public computing platform that offers public services at cost, then you can offer a transaction system that's feeless. So Bitcoin itself is not feeless. Bitcoin itself has fees associated in it on top of mining costs. So from the transaction perspective, you now have to pay fees. And I don't know if you've seen the rates of the fees have spiked up since the halving because the rewards for the mining has gone down, fees have gone up, right? And so honestly, if you take the Bitcoin system to its fullest, end state, there will be no more Bitcoins being mined, and all of the money that the miners make are through fees. And so it's going to become exceedingly expensive to use Bitcoin as the system goes on, and it's going to break. It's not sustainable. But if you made a feeless system, and you said, hey, shop owners and merchants, would you want to use our system for transactions? It's feeless, and it will save you, even if you're just a mom and pop shop, that could save you $600 or $1,000 a month or something. And who doesn't want free money? And so because of that, you're increasing the transactions, you're increasing the transaction velocity. And if the system is being used and there's transaction velocity, that means there's a market function of it. And so because you need to buy the currency to use the market, there's always an on-demand exchange for dollars to stone, or dollars to whatever the system uses. And so it's not about creating value through scarcity, but it's about creating value through function. And that's the main difference between Austrian and Keynesian to me. And that's why transaction velocity is it's one of the most key elements of the meta structure of it. It's not about creating scarcity, it's about creating transaction velocity. I have a few articles that go deep into that. I could show you. I'll send them to you after this, but that's the main difference between Austrian and Keynesian, for me at least.
Yeah, great. Where are your articles? Where do they live?
They're all over the place. They're a mix between Medium and LinkedIn, actually.
Okay,
but yeah,
cool.
So the crypto stuff is mainly on LinkedIn, actually.
Great, cool. Thank you for that. And I guess a little bit of apologies that I haven't done all the reading, but I am happy that we get the opportunity to talk through it,
It's a lot. It's better to just talk through it.
Yeah, I appreciate it a lot. All right.
But I would say a big difference that I would see for us versus other solutions was the idea of public computing. And a public computer is a really weird idea because it doesn't really exist. Ethereum is kind of looking at it, but it kind of skirts the idea. But it's just like the internet right now, it's all privately owned but publicly accessed. So we can't think of the internet as public. It's not a public computer, it's publicly accessed. But it's all existing on these private servers that people pay for. And because you pay for your server space, there's a return on investment structure. So because like right now I have a few websites, I pay probably like $1,000 to, $500 to $1,000 a year in web hosting, right? So because I pay that money, normally you would want a return on your investment, or it's a cost. So it's either there's two sort of models. You either pay costs, or you sort of are in business to return money on your investment, And so that structure creates that return on investment cycle that spins the economy that way. And so we're saying, if you have a public computing platform, it's relatively free, and there'd be like digital costs associated in the sense of like, there's an equilibrium level where there's like a share ratio. Kind of think of it from like a torrent or the old Napster and Kazaa sort of like swarm agents where you have a share level and you kind of want to maintain the share level. There would be a basic sort of minimum requirement of share level, but that's the idea. Is it's a public computing platform, and with a public computing platform, you can really create businesses and technological structures that don't have the return on investment structure cycle. You can actually, it's like, in a weird way, like open source is amazingly successful, but it's not that successful for the creator. It's like it's always a cost for the creator. And so it's like it's such a wide economic idea. It's like such a macro idea. If I make open source software and people use it, it's creating value for the world. But for you, the creator of that open source software, it's a cost. And you're actually sacrificing a lot of your hard work and time. So we're saying open source is good and giving people access is good. How do you justify that for the creators of the open source project? And so it's kind of like a reconsidering of
Oh, your
how to,
mic's dropped out.
oh,
Why has this happened?
hello. Let me, hello.
You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Can
you're
you hear
back
me?
now. You're
Yeah,
back.
that's
You're
weird.
back. You're back. Yep. Cool.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, how do you justify, uh, how do I create something that I can give it to everyone for free and still get paid? Like, how do you give free access while still getting the incentive for doing that? And that's kind of similar to that's why the medical economics actually makes sense as well. It's very similar technically if you look at the transaction dynamics, I guess is a good word, where one person is creating value for the entire system. So it's kind of how it's like a network transaction versus an individual transaction. Like the National For-Profit Protocol creates the supply chain, which is like a linear structure, and that's really good if you have something over in like the mountains, like ore and rocks, and you need to get that over here into the city. And so it's like, I'll sell this to you, and you sell it to this guy, and you sell it to that guy, and you sell it to the refiner who sells it into the person who turns it into like, tea beans for construction or whatever it is. And then finally we have an end product, and that's good because it's like a linear thing. But that's a very different process than someone who's making one thing and then selling it to a billion. It's just like digital things can be sold to a billion people in one link. And so it's a very, very different technical structure. And everyone can necessarily, like education is good for the entire society when one person gets it. And that's why we don't charge kids for their education, because it's actually good to have an entirely educated populace. So there's like these weird certain things that don't need supply chains. And if you can identify these social functions that don't need supply chains, pricing them with supply chains makes zero sense. And so how do you price something? Like, what's that technical transaction protocol that can price network assets rather than linear assets that have supply chains, And so that's the fundamental economic principle that we're looking at. It's like, oh, open source software is like that. Journalism's like that. Certain scales of law are like that, So there's a lot of things that kind of fit that pricing structure once you start looking at it, which is a kind of a like, oh, it's like you just start looking at the world in another light. It's just like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
A classic example.
Cool.
Sorry. The classic example that I have is a fish is not a movie. A fish is not an app. It's just like they're very different things. And if you're using one protocol to price both of them, can you really price them the same? Like, are those prices actually going to be fair for each asset? And I'm saying, no, they're not. So, you need to come up with multiple protocols when you have complex economies. And we have a very complex economy now. So.
All right, man, this is excellent. I'm really happy to hear all the distinctions you're making, gosh, I guess I'm trying to figure out where to go from here, but of course there's the questions of how does this look for different people, for a doctor, for a supplier, for a journalist, for all these different creators, and contributors. How does it look for them, and where does this all sit? And I guess on the local level, how does it look, and how is that migration from how things currently work to that? And maybe, like, one of the more simpler ideas which comes to mind is we pay for things as we normally do, but in order to onboard them into the network, that they're given a reward, tokens as a reward, which they can use elsewhere in the network. And this sort of drives exchange in this new network and sort of begins that migration. But I guess one of the big hurdles that I think all projects are sort of facing with such large ambitions is how do you reach that sort of near critical mass? You know, like how do you what is that transition period? Because if all of us got together and was like, yeah, right, 5 billion of us, let's jump on this because it's going to be great for all these reasons, that'd be excellent.
Right.
We could do that. But we're not in that world. So I guess, you know, you were talking about that one of the main things the team is doing is looking to secure these industry sort of partnerships or integrations.
Yeah.
And I guess you mentioned that when you were talking about the medical industry in the States. But how is there like are you looking to focus on one particular industry or set of people and sort of go through in batches like that?
You hit so many things perfectly. You hit the nail on the head. There's a critical mass you have to reach. And okay, so we were looking at, so I was really excited about the medical solutions because that's like 17% of America's GDP is spent on medical expenses. And so if you could win over, like if you can get one hospital network to start,
that's huge.
It's ridiculous.
It's fucking huge.
So I was working, the one hospital network we were working with, their annual income was like 100 million, not even their annual income. Their annual losses was 100 million. It's insane. It's so crazy. We were saying, like, if we could just work with one hospital network and get them to start taking it, that would establish a base price. But it was very difficult to bring in these extremely large scale. People were very interested, but for lack of a better term, we just couldn't get it off we never could get that escape velocity to sort of break orbit with the hospital. And I still think that it's possible. There was some internal stuff, and I had a partner leave, just lost kind of faith. It's tough. It's like you really have to get a lot of no's before you get yeses, and not everyone's cut out for doing this work. It's very difficult. Most people don't care about your theories on macroeconomics, even if they're correct. They want to make profits.
Even if you lead with the profits and the
sure. I think it would work. It just needs inroads and efforts, and I only have so much time. And honestly, medicine is not my area of expertise. And so before we went into the medical side of things, my area of expertise is actually in producing. I'm in Los Angeles. I got really early on in did you remember that company Machinima? They were a YouTube company that did a lot of stuff with like video game stuff. Anyway.
No. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. At one point they had, I think, 6 billion views a month. It was insane what they were doing, but they are now, because of bad management, they just don't exist anymore. But digital production is my area of expertise. And so after going the roundabout circle with the medical economics, which is still valid and I think can get out there, we're kind of stepping back from that and looking to do digital production as our sort of, because it's my own personal area of expertise, I feel a lot more comfortable just pushing that forward. And so the idea is to focus on digital creators. And are you at all into the sort of YouTube space or anything like that, or do you know anything about it?
Well, in terms of video production, or just like YouTube's current meta, or
I
guess like distribution platform dynamics, like how creators are.
The creator responds to sort of the platform, I guess. I think so.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I guess I've got a pretty wide view on different kinds of people who have either been censored or wronged or
right.
not um, by YouTube or other platforms.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not deep in any particular alternative platform at the moment.
Right.
Um, but yeah, the first example that comes to mind that I think is pretty well known and is a pretty huge example is Jordan Peterson's videos getting taken down and him
Right.
uploading everything to BitChute. I thought that was quite huge. Um,
I didn't realize
and
that happened. That's crazy.
yeah, he
Wow.
got censored, and he it was about maybe 8 months ago, 9 months ago,
Oh
and
wow.
he uploaded everything to BitChute, and now BitChute is his primary sort of platform.
Wow,
um,
crazy.
which
Yeah, that's
is
nuts.
yeah, it is nuts. Yeah, and uh, yeah, I guess I'm privy to some of the things, but I'm not a creator on there myself, and I
Yeah,
haven't.
so exactly like you said, there's problems with censorship. There's also problems with just profits and like how they're doing the profit structuring and just like the value add that YouTube adds to creators.
Mm,
And so what
mm,
we're saying is maybe less for video hosting because there's issues with video hosting that's I mean, there's definitely strategies where video hosting can be a valid um, alternative. But basically, we're saying is there's sort of like a differential equation for the creator. And if you can maximize the profits of the creator more than other alternatives, you're more likely to get those creators on your platform. And so when we're talking about like how do you get that critical scale, our entire idea is you can't get it through argumentation. Like you can't say, "Oh, this is our platform. It's better." Like no one cares. You know, if
mm,
it's not actually physically paying you more, it's not better. And so the whole goal is to make those uh, functional, usable uh, programs and functional design, and then invite people to use it. So if we're saying, hey, YouTube's giving you 2 cents per 2,000, it's like, or a cent, or no, I think YouTube's more like $1 per 1,000 ad clicks. You kind of that's kind of the rough numbers. And other things are way lower than that. Like Spotify's way lower. So if you can start saying, we'll give you 5 cents per 100 views or 5 cents of value per 1,000 views, and that's 10 times the amount of what YouTube pays. Okay, well that changes the economic scale, right? Because if let's say you're a YouTuber who's averaging, you know, I don't know, like pretty low numbers, but like 15,000 views a month. That's really not enough to justify the effort to do YouTube, right? And so if you can get that to say shift from being, let's say that 15,000 views a month is giving you, um, $200, but if you could shift that to be $1,000, that's a critical scale difference, right? And so
yeah, yeah,
now making a channel that has 15,000 views a month could be sustainable in your location, you know? And so that's kind of the strategy. You kind of have to shift the value add that you're giving to creators. And so
mm,
our whole strategy is make the platform and apps and get it out to creators and get them uh, more profitability. And the whole idea is it wouldn't be exclusive too. Like you could upload to our platform for the higher rate while still uploading to YouTube or whatever other thing you want. And maybe
yeah,
there's bonuses
yeah,
for exclusivity if you're like a big creator or something. Um, but then on top of that, I'm also a game designer, so a lot of this stuff just happens to be like I didn't study economics. It was just like naturally
mm,
evolving out of I was making worlds, and so it's like a lot of these economic stuff just happened to be coding stuff. Uh,
yeah,
and so, but making a video game is insanely hard. It's super
yeah,
hard, and especially if you're doing it by yourself, it's nearly impossible. And so I've been
mm,
working on this game for 5 years, honestly, and I
mm,
need help, right? And so it's kind of like, how do you scale a studio? And a movie studio is this really weird thing because uh, like making a movie is not profitable. Like making one movie is not really a profitable idea because you don't know if that movie is going to do well. Like, and this is my go-to example is, did you see BFG?
BFG, no.
Yeah, BFG. You know who the director of BFG is? Steven
No.
Spielberg. BFG
Right, right.
flopped. It's like like no one watched it, and it was a Steven Spielberg movie, right? And so if Steven Spielberg can make terrible movies that no one sees, and no one even knows the title of, like, what's your chances of making one movie that's going to be good, you know? And so even Steven Spielberg makes failures. So if you're Steven
Hmm.
Spielberg, you might like be the best filmmaker as far as the market's concerned, and still only have a success rate at like 60%. And so because you just don't know, there's sort of like a quantum entanglement of the audience responses of like, we just don't know what the response is. You have to have a portfolio of things to be really profitable. And that's why movie studios exist, is that they can absorb the losses. And so we're saying we can create a movie studio like system that scales up. Uh, and you can, so it's like, because it's really hard and it takes a lot of effort to go to market as a game designer, there's more people who want to make games and make video content than are actually employed by companies that are making those contents. And actually, like, not only are there more people that want to make it that aren't employed, because there's that huge source of pool of talents, quote unquote, the cost it takes to hire that talent goes down, right?
Mm.
And so we're saying, okay, there's this pool of talent that wants to do these things, that needs that organizational structure to be organized in a way to, it's like there's talent that's just like sitting on the bench. And so we're saying we can attract that talent on the bench and actually create remarkable things and then put money in their pocket. Now, would we be able to pay them the same rate that the market is paying them right now? Probably not. It would probably be lower than the market. But if you're already doing nothing and you want to do something and you want to get involved, here's like access. And so a big thing that I want to do, and where we're focusing now, is in large scale studio collaboration platforms for things like games. So I've been working. My game is called The Garden Parade, and it's did I send any videos about that? Like,
No, I don't think so.
I
You
can,
you sent me like a city example, city living
yeah,
example.
exactly. So that was actually made
Um,
in Unreal Engine. So I'm an Unreal
yeah,
dev. So
yeah.
my game's also in Unreal. Um, but the idea is a lot of the assets were made in VR. So you can use VR to create assets, you know, like it's a totally new workflow, and it's way
Mm.
easier to make assets. It's like
Right.
it's hard to explain how much easier it is, but it's just like when you're in VR, this is like a really complex 3D move. And
Hmm.
imagine replicating that with a 2D mouse. It's really hard.
Yeah,
And so you have to
yeah,
like change the view and you're doing all these things. So like when you're in VR, you're just like, boop, and you get this like
yeah.
beautiful shape.
Hmm.
And you can bring that into a game engine. And so what we're saying is because like technology is coming down here and there's like people that are like here, it's like once there's an equilibrium, all these new people that want to make games now can.
Mm.
And we
Hmm.
can organize that and say, okay, you can make certain assets. You probably can't go, you can't program a game now just because you can make certain things in VR. So we'll pair you with storytellers and actors and people who want to get involved, and we can do profit sharing through the data sovereignty. And so because we
Yeah.
have the data sovereignty and the smart tracking of digital assets, you can be like, oh, when you play this game, it's like this level loads these assets, and these assets were created by these people. So now these people are getting paid. And so that's kind of what we're
Hmm.
focusing on now is just like what you said, we need an incentivization platform for people uploading data. And game data is really valid. And so you can basically create packs of 3D assets and use that to get adoption for the platform. And actually, that's actually the strategy that Unreal uses. Unreal actually, Unreal as a company is very, very interesting. They're doing some amazing things. Like they just announced that they're getting rid of licensing up to $5 million for creators.
Wow.
So you have to make 5 million before they start charging you, which is amazing.
Yeah,
That's like so
that's
cool.
huge. Yeah,
Yes, I get goosebumps thinking about it.
yeah.
But we can use like off-the-shelf programs like Unreal and just track our data. So what we're trying to do is basically say, hey, look, do you want to join the Garden Parade? and make stories and games for the garden parade, and you can have access to all of the assets. And this is the sort of stylistic sort of angles, and
Mm.
here's all the assets for this level, and here's all the assets for this level. And if you want to make new assets, you can make new assets. If you want to combine assets together to make new levels, you can do that as well. So it's just like, how do you give someone access to something that they don't have? Uh, and there's a lot of people that want to do creative stuff. Honestly, I was talking to some people out of RMIT that were really interested in, like, how do you scale up these really hard things? And it's tough when certain locations just don't have the scale of collaboration available. Like, it's kind of hard to find a programmer and a game designer and all these people that not only live in the same area or can collaborate, but then have enough free time to get deferred payment. So like, I've been
Yeah.
working on this for 5 years. Like, this is not making me any money. This is a huge cost. So it's like, you have to speed up that time, and that's in between freelancing and doing a bunch of other work. Um, so you have to, yeah. So it's all about creating a platform through the idea of, together we can create way more value in products than you can individually. And so that's kind of the
Mm.
goal, to attract creators. So the idea is, you get the creators first, you make good content, and then you release the good content, and that attracts the audience. And then that creates a sort of cycle of, oh, now there's an audience, now there's a demand, now more people upload. And so it's just about like making the functions function. So that's the goal. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a life work. It's not like it's something that you're gonna make overnight. So it's
Yeah.
definitely something you have to keep pushing.
Mm. Mm.
But that's the
Thanks
strategy.
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great, great. Thanks so much for sharing all that. Ah,
Can I share a video?
yeah, man. Of course.
I'm just. This is actually my first Zoom meeting, but I was wondering, maybe the.
If you share the screen while it's playing on your screen, it'll be okay, but the sound might be choppy and everything. So
Okay.
maybe if you want to send it to me.
Yeah. Let me see. Log into my Zoom. Might just help to get some visuals.
Yeah, sure. Hmm. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, what are you working on? What's your area of expertise? I've been talking a lot. I'm curious to know about you.
yeah. At the moment, I'm working just helping an agency with their core communications and sort of content in general, while they figure out what their strategy is for market.
Right.
But my area of expertise, um, I'm sort of a blend of so I studied computer science, but went into marketing pretty heavily.
Right.
And I think my area of expertise would just be um, consumer tech and consumer communications, I guess.
Right.
Um, Consumer tech communications would be a fair summary, I think.
That makes perfect
Um,
sense.
yeah, yeah. Just having been on the front lines with a lot of people in a lot of different jobs and industries, but really being with just everyday, usual, normal people and how they interact with the stuff they buy and the stuff they use. So I guess what I'm drawn to the most at the moment is the conversation of data sovereignty, because um, there's still a very, very, very large amount of people that are just not privy to any of it and don't care, and
Yeah.
think they don't have to care.
Right.
So that's kind of where I'm one of the main things I'm drawn to at the moment. But
They're gonna start caring a
um,
lot more when they see their faces on things. It's just.
yeah,
I mean, that might be an extreme example because there's some protections against that already. But it's just like,
yeah,
I mean, all of us, like, Instagram can literally make a, a profile out of everyone. It's like, basically Instagram, Facebook, all these companies that have our images, they can, like, through, I don't know if you've seen the uh, the deep fakes go by. I'm sure you have, but you could,
mm-hmm.
like, with 10 to 20 images of someone's face, you can make a pretty decent deep fake, and
Yeah,
it's pretty scary what that means. And so protecting against that is going to become a lot more relevant for sure.
Yeah. Did you want to play the video yourself, or are you looking to send it?
Is there a chat screen on Zoom?
There is a chat in Zoom. If you down the bottom, it should have just next to share screen on the left.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Cool. Yeah. Great. See if this link works. It might be private, but I think it's a dev diary that I was sending last year. But you can see a lot of those assets are actually made in Quill, which is just like
in Quill.
Yeah, the VR Facebook app. Facebook's painting VR app, so it's a great app, honestly. Cool. It's super powerful. So you can make really, really quick things, and especially for this sort of cartoon style, it's great. Not so much for a realistic style.
Yeah, I was going to share my screen, but it looks like I can't. It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
I don't know why. I did not mean to do that intentionally. Let me see if I can share screen.
It's pretty cool to hear you draw lines from designing games to understanding economics. I've never designed a game. I built like some text-based ones and sort of drew out some small prototypes with a friend of mine. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really enjoy when others recognize just how difficult it is and how big building a game is, because you're literally building everything. You're
building everything.
A world. Yeah.
It's wild. This might. You'll hear. Can you hear me in the video?
Hang on. Go ahead. Is that playing?
Yeah. I'm gonna lower the voice, just because it's confusing. But yeah, can you see anything?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. I can.
Can I make it bigger? Should I make it bigger?
Maybe make it bigger. Yeah. There we go.
I could full screen it. There we
go.
Yeah. So all these assets, I mean, obviously they're kind of basic, but like it's a very cartoony style. But all these were made in Quill. Even the character was made in Quill. Let's see. There we go. So like all the vines and the trees and the character was made in Quill as well. So you can get this like really cool stylistic cartoon style really, really easily. And so honestly, it's what I would love to do, and I actually think a really good target audience to get it in as creators is kids. Like people before they go to sort of like the industry, before they're sort of like professional level, if you can get them on, like, all I remember is like when I was 13, even when I was 8, gosh, when I was like 5, I remember playing Super Mario 3 and seeing the Stompums. And I was like, oh, what if you took like effects from Looney Tunes? Like, remember when Wile E. Coyote would like stomp something and would like float up like a pancake and then float down? I was like, well, what would happen if instead of Mario, just like popping and falling down, like there was like rich animations, not knowing about limitations of the software and the hardware at the time. So really early on, I always wanted to be a game designer, but it's just such a hard thing to do, and there's not really like systems to help you make them. And so if I was offered the ability to sort of make things as a kid, or really had the access to sort of get on a group that's making, real things, I think a lot of people would jump on board. So yeah, it's kind of just like, it's in this iteration, it's a 2D side scroller, but I think you'll see in a second I go into the 3D area. But yeah, no, it's like it's really accessible for kids to even get on board with like, hey, look, I made this crayon drawing. Let me upload that data, and then someone would be like, oh, that's a really cool character. Let me make that in Quill. And these could be like kids that are like 6 and 8 or 12. And then it could be in a collaboration with someone who's an adult and a professional at the same time. So it's like there's really all sorts of scales that this could apply on. And then with Unreal Engine, it's just like such a great freaking engine, and it's robust, and like why not use what's already there? There's no reason, because the whole play for us is the data side. And so all the data is still raw data, even if it's using Unreal Engine. Uh,
Yeah.
and if you get over the 5 million, you pay the licensing fees like normal. That's just part of the economics of it. That's kind of the idea.
I think you mentioning kids there is super important, because I'm just thinking, I mean, obviously the impact that would have is massive. You know, you have high schoolers, or you have, you know, just school kids in general talking
Yeah.
about this platform and being able to make stuff and share things that they're building. And then, you know, I guess the reputation that builds from partnering with
Mm-hmm.
educational institutions and things like that is just huge. You know,
Right.
it just would provide so much social proof.
Right.
Yeah, to be able to partner and you know, a number of other industries or places. So that's massive.
And then kids are also interesting because when you're a kid, you don't really think about things from a return on investment. Like you're not an adult, so you're not really
Yeah,
thinking in a monetary way. You're thinking of what
yeah,
do I want to do? And
yeah,
it's like adults don't think that way. Adults think, how do I make
yeah,
money? Like they get rid of
yeah.
their intentions and like, how do I get profit? But kids are like weird, like they're weird freaks that actually have dreams and want to do things.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll show you this. This is like a more of a, you'll see more elements of it. It's pretty rough. This is like a very rough sort of trailer that I was working on. But unfortunately, honestly, um, even though my heart's here, getting to work on this is just, it's tough. You know, there's only so much time in
yeah,
the day.
yeah.
So this is showing a more realized version of it, even though not fully realized. Um, so yeah, so we have a distributed creative studios as an element of Pietra.
Hmm.
So very inspired by Miyazaki here.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, all these assets are made in Quill. Pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
that is. So Quill is not really linked to Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine, you could import Unreal Engine assets into Quill, or vice versa.
Vice versa. So you can import
Yeah.
assets made in Quill. So these are made in Quill and optimized. Some of them are made in Maya also, but it's Quill and Maya, and then put in the Unreal Engine. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
this is just showing. So the idea is like the whole idea of the Garden Parade is it's sort of a Animal Farm meets Network, the movie. But
Right, right.
the idea is those gators, and um, there's a whole story of like management is trying to get the citizens of the town to go to work, and you're
Mm.
trying to get the citizens of the town to do parades. And so there's
To
this
do
like
what?
to go basically make parades, and parades are the gameplay is it's kind of like, do you play games at all?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you play the most recent Mario?
No,
So
unfortunately.
it's pretty cool. They have this like hat mechanic where you can throw your hat and then you jump on your hat. But there's this like method. It's sort of a platformer, but basically it's a platformer with an infinite jump. But that infinite jump, in order to do the infinite jump, you have to like iterate on it. And so it's
Right.
like, but when you're doing the infinite jump, every single move is tied to a musical idea. And so it's kind of a
Mm.
little bit like sort of like Zelda or Metroid, where
Mm.
depending on your move set, you make different sounds, and the different move sets do different things. Like gives you like a super jump or certain things. But the
Yeah.
idea is when you go through your level, because you have sort of a relatively unique case and like use different move sets. When you go through a level, you're basically making a song. And so the
Mm.
idea is you can create a platform-based platformer with like an infinite jump uh, mechanism, but as you're doing it,
Mm.
you're making a song, and depending on your inputs. And so the
That's
way that
cool.
it works is there's an audience in the city, so you can sort of go around, and there's two different I guess sides of it. Like one gameplay loop is you're sort of exploring the wild environment and getting new songs and new beats, and you're sort of making friends and you're making people that will be your squad. when you do the parade, and then the other element of it is going on doing a parade itself. And so you
Hmm.
collect different items, like you might have to get like a few. There's like expendables, like you might have rockets that you only have a few of them, but that makes like a like all different
Yeah.
noises and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
the story of it and what I would love to do and how I would like to attract people to get them on board is be like, hey, look, here's this world. We need to populate this world. You might not be a game designer, but you might be a writer that is really interested in writing for games, And so, like, let's create an onboard system that's easy and clear. Be like, okay, here's this character. Here's all of their traits. Now start thinking of stories that can happen around them. And then,
Mm.
okay, here's the story. I'm the game. I'm like a game. There's because you
Yeah.
have personal profiles on the system, and this is just you can even do this like with pencil and paper. You don't even have to have the
Mm.
Pietra live system to do this. Honestly, it's just like organizational stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just like if you have the permissions to have access to these stories and start combining them. Now, as like a game producer level, it might be a little bit of a tier up. So I'm a level producer, like not me personally, but like John X is a level producer. Now John X can see all these like assets under this character. Let me start actually taking these assets and combining them together into levels. So now when you release new content, it's being released through the sort of distributed creative process. And so it's just like, how do we get more people making cool stuff? And
Mm.
that's kind of what it's all about. You know, how do you
Mm.
get more good?
Mm. I love the idea there. I love the whole concept there. That's awesome. What a fun and I guess like totally non-serious
Right.
game, you know?
Yeah.
Like that it, it really feels like just from that it feels like just a yeah, it feels like it's made just to create things, which is super cool.
Nice.
Super
Thanks,
cool.
man. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, well, I was going into these VR games, and it started off as a VR game, and I would love to have it still be in VR, but VR is
Mm.
it's a lot of people get motion sickness in VR, so it's kind of hard to do certain wild things in VR.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
uh, the the base idea was kind of like, oh, when you go into VR, it's really, really easy to make things feel ghost-like and scary and empty and like dreadful. That's actually really easy to do. It's way
Mm.
harder to give you like a peaceful experience. It's harder to go into a world that feels alive.
Mm.
And there's a reason why we go into worlds and kill everything. It's because it's
Mm.
way easier to make that dynamic of it. It's
I've
just
never realized that, but when you say that, it seems very true.
it's simplistic. It's
Yeah.
just like let me point
Yeah.
and shoot rather than have a conversation. And so I was thinking
Mm.
like, how do you have a game that's creating like conversations between the players? And like, did you play this game? Is it Flow? I think it's Flow. Is it no?
So,
What is it called? Uh, Journey. Sorry, it's Journey.
Journey.
Was it
No, I
PS?
think I saw it around though. Was that sort of one of the uh, you know, key releases for I think PS3 or something?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly right. I think yeah. So it's a really cool game design company called That Game Company. I think it's
mm.
Genova Chen's company. Um,
Ah.
they also did Flow, which is like another sort of stylistic game. But what was really
Mm.
cool about it is you'd play the game and other people could sort of, it was mainly a single player game, but every
Mm.
now and then you'd see another player sort of enter into your world and they were just a real player. But
Mm.
there was no chat in the game. And you communicate
Right.
with the other player with there's like a really simple, like positive grunt and a negative grunt. And just
Right.
through that dynamic, you got this like really rich interaction that was very different than the shooting sort of like very simplistic interaction.
Hmm.
And so the base of this idea actually came from that. It's just like, how do you expand on that? And how do you sort of create like a conversation system? And I was like, well, if you're really doing a conversation system, you could make that be music if you wanted it to. So
Mm.
that's kind of
Mm.
where the heart of it comes from. Yeah, that's honestly where my heart is at. It's just like I've always wanted to make video games, and it's been so hard. I've had to like re-explore economics.
Mm. Mm.
So
Man, it's really beautiful. Thanks so much. Um, hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I played video games a lot as a kid and love video games and sort of have let them go to make room for life, more
You
room
have
for
to.
life, I guess.
It's hard to have
Yeah,
a simulated life and a real life.
yeah. And yeah, I fiddled around with Unreal Engine, maybe a couple of engines a few years ago, but never did any serious work. But
Mm,
I can have some sort of an understanding of just how much work goes into building
insane.
games. It is insane. It's absolutely insane.
There's a
Um,
whole discussion on video game in the video game design community. It's like, can you play games and make them? Like, is there enough time?
yeah, yeah,
And it's like, not
yeah,
really. You know, it's
yeah,
just a weird idea. But I think you kind of have to, honestly. You have to see what's out
yeah,
there.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'm trying to think through, you know, what's next for the project, but also what's next for you, you know, like it feels like
Sure.
um what you're I mean Pietra and I'm curious to hear like where Lorena
Right. Yeah.
was or is. And I'm also curious about how I guess WebGL and WebGR translate so easily into things like Docker and Hashgraph. I
Sure.
don't understand that in
I
my
don't
mind. So
necessarily understand that either.
yeah, that's cool. But
That's
that
more of a
seems very
less
convenient.
question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, my partner Les is an amazing like systems level coder, and I can tell you the
Right.
projects he's denied. He'll get upset with me because they're like national security level projects. It's just like he's a
Sure.
wild guy,
Sure.
super talented. Like it blows. Like he was coding in hex for machine language stuff. It was just like wild stuff. Like he's really crazy level, like
Yeah.
way more than I am.
Yeah.
And so he's really the person that would the technical questions on how did you actually,
That's cool.
yeah,
It'll be over
I
my
don't
head
know,
anyway. It's
yeah,
really a curiosity thing.
right, right. As
Yeah.
far as next steps go, though, and this kind of is a good sort of, I guess, maybe closing question, but it's kind of wraps everything together. Is
Yeah.
So with the the video that I sent about that neighborhood, the housing stuff, is just in my experience of trying to make games. I've had to deal with getting kicked out of living situations because of like the landowners didn't have weren't up to code, you know, and just multiple interruptions after multiple interruptions, and then you have to like work freelance for a bunch of months just to save up to spend 3 months on your game or working on a project, and then funds run out and you have to do it again, and there's this whole cycle. And then when you're doing that on top of it, when you're doing any sort of digital project that has a lot of dependencies, it's like I've had major setbacks. And right now, honestly, I don't know if I have access to that code anymore. I probably will have to make it all over again. Now, thank God, I still have access to all of my assets, so I'm not recreating any of the assets. But it's going to be really annoying to recode all of that. I mean, it'll probably take me a few weeks, but it's not like devastating. Like if I lost all the assets, I'd just be a massive
No, but
mess.
yeah.
But like when you're not working on something in a standard sort of like professional setting, 9 to 5 setting, that you're sort of like hacking the system in order to do something crazy. Um, when I mean hacking the system, I mean hacking the social
Putting
system.
it.
Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of setbacks, and so like I had a hard drive failure and I lost the code. I had some issues with the city and neighbors and just like instability in general of just living in a large city.
Mm,
Like
mm,
it's really hard to pursue like how do you build stability in your life when you're trying to also like make a game, or like if you're already trying to do something really hard, you're going to be reducing certain things elsewhere. Like you're making sacrifices to do that. And so what the neighborhood idea is kind of like, okay, we could do this all from a distributed setting over online, and we could do a lot of the organization distributedly, but also how do we create a city and how do we create stability for creators who are doing these complex creative processes? And Besides Unreal, pretty much most companies' businesses model is to like, how do we leverage our technology and get money out of your pocket? So from my perspective as a creator, I'm like paying money to Adobe every month. I'm paying money to Maya every month. I'm paying web hosting every month, you know? So there's all these fees on top of the fact that it just takes massive amounts of time and effort to do. Um, so we're thinking like, okay, not only how do we do this on a global scale, how do we actually create a local level, how do we create a local city that's not like literally trying to profit off of your creative
Mm.
intention. And so the whole goal with the city is like we can rescale cities on another on a, we can combine the studio model with the municipal model in order to help creators create more content and get that content to the market. And if you
Mm.
combine talents and you combine scale, you can get rid of some of the problems that you have individually. And so, honestly, my personal next steps are um, so I have that video. I'm working on a survey for creatives and creators and people in cities, um, just to sort of get hard data on what your experience is like. Are you able to build wealth and pursue your artistic goals? Are very simple things like that. But then I would really love to go to Unreal, um, especially because I was looking at a city in North Carolina, outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Are you familiar with Buckminster Fuller? I don't know if he's famous
No,
outside of America. So Buckminster
no.
Fuller was this artist and architect that really popularized the geodesic dome structures. So if you see
Mm.
he's really associated with geodesic domes, even though he's done a lot more.
Right.
But anyway, him and John Cage and a bunch of other writers and intellectuals in the I think 50s or 60s created
Mm.
Black Mountain College outside of Asheville, North Carolina. So I was thinking it would be cool to try to raise money in order to create a new municipal design, in order to create more stable locations, and then also use that as a case study for a new municipal design. For okay, if you have with smart technology and the advancements in solar technology and hydro technology and wind technology, can you make 100% green grid neighborhood and city? And
Mm.
really, you need to be at the city scale, so you don't go into like if you don't have a critical scale, there's problems with like cult, personality cults and stuff like that, and you really
Right.
want to avoid that. And I think the
Yeah.
sev- the 70s really showcased how that could go really south. Um, so that's why it's a city, not a commune or a community. Um, but with clever municipality design, you can create cities that instead of trying to extract the wealth out of the populace, it's trying to
Mm.
create a place of stable design for the populace to actually be able to make these digital assets that then can be exported out globally. And
Mm.
so that's what I'm looking at now, both a combination of doing the studio design on a global level and a local level. And so that's kind of like the marriage of the two. It's just like, how do we scale up these designs and create support for creators who are doing super difficult tasks? Because
Mm.
right now the business model is, oh, you're trying to do something hard. Well, we could help you out for a fee, And so we're trying to be
Mm.
like, oh, you're trying to do something valuable. Well, we can help you out because we recognize what you're adding into the world. And so
Yeah.
hopefully, um, I definitely want to approach Unreal because Unreal is also based in North Carolina. And so the next steps for me is definitely just start getting out the concepts to people that might be able to do capital raising. Unreal is an interesting case because they obviously realize the scenario that video game designers are in, and that's why they're giving it away for free. They realize, oh, it helps us make money if people use the software to make games and actually make end products rather than just like,
Mm.
bullshit. And so
Mm.
how do you help these creators? And so I think Unreal doesn't have anything like a movie studio. And what I mean is like when I say movie studio, I don't mean like a small creative studio. I mean like Paramount or like Columbia.
Mm.
Like the
Mhm.
huge movie studios. They have massive scale.
Mhm.
And yeah, so hopefully we could raise money to get the local solution up. That would definitely be an example for green tech as well as local agriculture supply chains. And then also serve as a solution for COVID. I think COVID has really showcased systemic weaknesses in our organizational structure of like how we invest in cities and how cities work, and like what's the benefit of being in a large city if there's risks for getting sick and getting viruses,
Mm.
um, especially right now. uh, and so part of the idea is, if you have a city at a certain scale that has vertical supply chains, you can reduce access to risk of the pandemic. Like honestly, we don't know if a vaccine is coming, and so this could honestly go for another 3 years. Historically, if you look at pandemics, they last a long time, and so we're kind of saying, well, if you can create an organized city at scale, then you can social distance together. And so once you're in the city and you're cleared, it's like, okay, now it's a walking city. It's more of a village or a town. Our goal is between 5,000 and like 100,000 at the max. So yeah, so we're trying to see if we can get investment in that to not only do the La Reina local model, but then tie that with sort of like the studio structures and the creative structures. So it's
Mm.
a lot. So crossing my fingers if we'll get any investment on that. But that would be the goal. And then if that kind of doesn't work, just focusing on the global distributed creative studio stuff at the same time. So kind of
Mm.
like the
Mm.
dual, how do you make creative processes locally and how do you make them globally? And then try to attract creators.
Yeah, yeah. And that investment money would really go down to, I guess, the infrastructure, the actual development, the land,
Yep.
the buildings. Yeah, yeah, all the renewable, I guess, energy.
I mean, you're buying generators, you're buying like wind energy, your solar
Mm.
panels, you're buying,
Mm.
it's a lot of just straight upfront capital to make this. You're talking about making a city. That's not like a cheap thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's definitely a big
Um,
picture thing. It would definitely need, and so we have a pretty novel investment structure actually. So hopefully it won't confuse people. It probably will, but it could also attract people. And also, I think there's a lot of people, and this just gets into like one investment thing. Maybe I'll stop here, but
mm.
there's a difference between like Wall Street and Main Street, and it's way easier for an investor who lives in Arizona to invest in Wall Street than it is for them to invest in Main Street. And just,
Mm.
are you familiar with those terms, Wall Street and Main Street? I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Like Wall Street is in, stock exchange. Main Street is in like the city's Main Street.
yeah, exactly. It's like a bodega. It's like a private company
Yeah.
that's not listed. It's just like some mom and pop shop. So in order to invest in that, you'd have to know the owner, or you'd have to like be a partner in a business. And if you're in Alabama and you want to invest in a place that's like 5 states away, or in Melbourne, how do you do that? Like, how do I know I can trust you? How do I know your business model is good? It's like really difficult. And so because just from the investor's perspective, it's way easier to invest in Wall Street just because everything's
Mm.
public. It's like the system's already set up. It's just like, oh, I can just buy stock, boom. I don't have to worry about necessarily. Obviously, you should look at any company you're investing in management. But if you can just trade Wall Street stocks. You don't have to invest. You could also do trading techniques. Um, so there's just a flow that, from the investor's perspective, it's just way easier to invest in Wall Street. And so that over time has created this incentive where it's just hollowed out main streets. It's like, well, why are main streets failing all over? At least in America, we have this big problem. Like all of our small towns are just, it's like the big mega cities are growing bigger and bigger, and the small towns are just
Mm.
getting abandoned, and they're now becoming
Yeah.
Walmart towns. And why is it happening? It's like, well, it's way easier to invest in Walmart than it is to invest in Main Street because actually, Walmart's private. Sorry, bad
Yeah.
example. But it's just way easier to invest in a big
In a
globalized
public
company,
Yeah.
right, than it is to invest
Yeah.
in private. You can't. So uh,
Yeah.
there's no instrument for it. And so what uh, our model does is it creates an indexed Main Street portfolio for the Main Street of these towns. And so because we'll have real price earnings ratios, we'll have real fundamental economics behind it. It creates a sort of Main Street local investment instrument where investors can be like, oh wow, look at this town is doing really well. We can look at all their flows, their capital flows. We can look at their income versus their imports. You know what I mean? like the imports versus exports, and we can actually see the fundamentals of the town, I can make money by purchasing this fiscal instrument. And so we're
Mm,
offering another fiscal instrument that would hopefully help put funding back onto Main Street, and then also help onshore uh, production and manufacturing back into local areas. And honestly, I could see that totally being valid for Australia as well, completely. Like,
mm,
uh, yeah, for sure. So I think it could really help a lot of places just get more funding and more investment capital instead
mm.
of only going to like your investment capital is only going to San Francisco, it's only going to Seattle, it's only going to these like few select places that have those globalized corporations at scale. So that's the big goal, which is a lot.
This is definitely a life's work. Definitely a
It
life's
is.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations, I guess, on all the progress so far, but also for recognizing just how like all the issues and how it can be done. I think it's really amazing. So
Oh, thanks, man.
yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk through it all.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, I guess I'd like to offer some support, and whether that's I guess maybe looking to fill out that creator survey here or distribute that here,
Yeah, that'd be
or
great.
even reviewing the structure of that, and maybe talk if you
Absolutely.
need help, talking through that, and maybe what the objectives are that you're looking to get from that data. um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, and I guess with partnerships and I guess comms, it's your field as well. But if you need some editorial support or anything,
I'm
please
sure. I'm sure there's there's things that you're looking at like, oh no, this is good, but it could be it could be better.
no. It's always good to have. I mean, for me at least, I struggle when
Mhm.
I don't have some sort of editorial support. It can get
Absolutely.
a little bit cloudy.
It's hard to do
So
both scales at the same time. Absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, please hear my offer for support there.
For sure.
And
Absolutely. I do.
yeah, I'd really look forward to. One thing you said there was yeah, people might find the investment model confusing. I would say maybe, but like when you have multiple people explaining it in different ways, eventually it resonates with multiple
Absolutely.
people in different ways. So
Absolutely.
um, yeah, I wouldn't let that deter you. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. No, thanks so much, man. It's been like nearly 2 hours now,
Yeah, I
so
know. We've been
it's
really going at
cool.
it. But yeah,
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you so much. I'll definitely be in touch. I will send. I'll send you the. So actually, we just finished the survey. Like basically this morning, like just before this call. And so we've sent it out to a few test cases to get like review. Like, hey, are these questions fair? You know. So I
Hmm.
can send it to you if you want to take it. I'd love for your just primary data, but then also on top of that,
Yeah,
like send me like, oh no, this question's terrible. Like if you
yeah,
want to do that, that's totally fine. I would
yeah.
love that. That would be a big help. And then yeah, identifying people in Australia and doing an Australian version,
Mm,
or not an Australian version, but having a whole data set out of like locally in Australia, I think would be great too. Um,
mm,
yeah, honestly, a lot of these, from what I was inspired by Melbourne, just in how the neighborhood designs have like central plazas. I thought that was,
mm,
I think doesn't exist in America.
mm.
Like you can have like you could live next to a little main street and go to a coffee shop and get a great
That's it,
coffee.
man.
It's
It's great.
awesome.
Yeah, little hubs everywhere.
I love
It's
it.
one of yeah. I'm from Perth originally on the west side, and we don't really have a lot of those. We probably have a few. It's a much smaller city. But yeah, Melbourne does it really well.
Yeah, it's
It's
cool. Very
Yes.
inspiring. All
Yeah.
right, man. Well, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun going over it. Yeah. So I'll be in
Cool.
touch for sure.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks so much. Take care, Jordan.
You too. Have a good one.
See ya.
Later.